Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome, everybody, to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm Peter Moses with my co-hosts. Well, I'll do it the other way today. John Sharan and Ardina Seward. Last week I did it the opposite way, and I got dagger eyes from John. So I don't want to have to deal with that again. But next week I'm going back to Ardina, John, so you're going to have to learn to deal with
You're
that.
just a rebel.
Well, not really. But we have someone on our show today, live in studio, who is somewhat of a rebel. If you, it depends how you look at it. I think this is a popular movement. Not populist in the way that Trump is a populist, but more in the Democratic side of things. Indivisible Westchester. Now, indivisible has always been a tough word for me. Growing up, it was one of those words I had to think about how to pronounce it because, I'm half brain dead. But we have with us today one of the founders of Indivisible Westchester. Her name is Shannon Powell.
Hello.
Hello. And
say indivisible 3 times quickly.
No, I'm not even going to try that. But what I would like to ask you is, you must have been very pleasantly surprised that George Latimer not only won, but won handily.
Yes, that was a surprise. I mean, we worked very hard to help get George elected. We decided, actually, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary, and at our first meeting, which 700 people showed up to at a church in Larchmont last January, I mentioned, when I got up to speak, I mentioned the county executive and that was a race that we needed to pay attention to, that he was a Trump supporter. So, we targeted that right away and started to organize around Astorino, awareness about, what county government was, what he stood for. And so we were at town halls. I mean, it was really months and months and months of voter education. And so then when George came along and he became the candidate and we backed him, Rob was a great candidate. He was a media guy. You guys know how that goes. He was very
being
slick.
a media guy doesn't make you smart.
No, but he was slick, and slick matters. I mean,
slick does matter. Slimy isn't that far off from slick.
Let's cut him a little bit of slack. I mean, he did lose by 14 points. So, but, he was on message, and he knew, and he had a very simple message. I'm not going to raise you. I haven't raised your taxes. I mean, when you have an elevator pitch like that.
But he has lowered services and left jobs on.
Exactly. And so that was some of the education that we had to do. But George did handedly beat Rob, and I do think it was the revolt of the people. I mean, I think what you see is that people were engaged and that they were feeling very different, this time around than they were 4 years ago. And part of that, too, is people were also very hyper engaged at the local level. And I think what you saw was a true grassroots campaign where people were involved, in turning the town board in Yorktown and some of these really hyper local races and the county legislative races. And they were really getting people out all down ballot. And I think what you saw, I personally believe that part of the 14-point advantage is just truly from the grassroots up. I think what people think of as, the top of the ticket's going to drive support down ballot, but it's actually the definition of grassroots is, the inverse of that. It's support at the top, support at the bottom, then amounts to increased turnout at the top of the ticket. And I really think that's part of why the result was what it was. Some
of our listeners might not know what Indivisible Westchester.
That's true.
That's
it. 3 times.
They might not know what Indivisible Westchester is all about. Why don't you give them a brief overview?
I will give them a background. So Indivisible, so it's a progressive movement. The overriding purpose is to fight back against the Trump agenda, to have progressive values of inclusion, equality, respect, opportunity, and just the belief that government can be a vehicle for good if it's approached in the correct way. Government isn't perfect, but it can be a vehicle for change. And so that's how we organize.
And how was it formed? I mean, you say it's coming up on its first anniversary.
It is
so it's
coming up
young.
on its first anniversary. So the background of Indivisible was there was this Google document called the Indivisible Guide that I read when it first came out. It went viral that 2 congressional staffers in Washington, D.C. put together. And basically what they did was they looked at how the Tea Party organized. And they created this document that was a roadmap for how people can organize. It was a roadmap for how people could organize. So they, based on what the Tea Party did, and a lot of this was the hyper local concentrated outreach. And so when this Google document went around, to me, it was so simple. It was something that really resonated.
Well, we're here with Shannon Powell, one of the founders of Indivisible Westchester, Peter.
Indivisible Westchester.
That's right.
Ardina, can you say it?
I like Indie Westchester.
I like that.
Much easier, much easier.
I'll second that.
Well, we're sharing our views and listening to Shannon Powell here on Westchester Eye on the radio, which is not Indivisible Westchester, but here on WVOX 1460 and 1460 AM and 1460.com, WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with Peter Moses and Ardina Seward. We'll be back with Shannon Powell after a rather long break. We have back-to-back breaks involving Fox and Fox News and Fox Business. So stay tuned, and we'll be back talking more about Westchester.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Charan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
We are back. Thanks for staying with us, folks. This is Westchester Eye on the Radio. I am Ardina with John Charan, Peter Moses, and our guest today is Shannon Powell, who is a founder of a progressive group in Westchester called Indivisible Westchester.
Well done.
It was hard to say for a person who has a latent stutter. Believe me, it was hard. I had to force that sucker out. Indivisible Westchester. We were talking earlier about the Indivisible Westchester movement, how it has grown. And Shannon, I have a question.
Sure.
What percentage of your group are Republican or former Republicans?
You know, it's hard to say because we did a survey early on, and we had quite a few percentage-wise based on how many people we have. We've grown so quickly. That would be something that we really should revisit and try and knuckle down. I do know we have I know a couple of people who are former Republicans who are just felt disenfranchised by their party. And I know we have a lot of independents as well as Democrats. So, I do think that it's important, that we're open to anybody and everybody who's interested in being part of the movement. And it's my belief that we can have guiding principles. We don't have to agree on absolutely everything, the approach to everything, as long as you agree, with the principle of equality and freedom and, the belief that government can do well and respect for other people and, those sort of things. Then
what is the gender
breakdown?
Oh, but it's primarily women. I mean, it's definitely women driven. So getting back to kind of, there was this Google document. So what happened shortly after we read the Google document is then there were the folks who put out the Indivisible Google document decided that, hey, if you want to form an indivisible group, go to this website and sign up. So I went and signed up. I was part of a small group of women who met right after the election to try and decide, okay, we need to do something, but what is that something going to be? So we were having a number of different meeting with different other people in the community, talking to some political leaders, just trying to figure out what the political wins would be, what the best means of organizing moving forward would be. And so when this Indivisible Guide in the group, I went ahead and registered us as Indivisible Westchester right before the Women's March. And with the thought being, look, I think this is something, we like the guide. It was very concrete. I think this is going to be a movement. Let's go to the march and then figure out how we want to organize. And after we came back from the march, there were a group of probably half a dozen of us, maybe closer to 10 at the time. And we decided the Tuesday after the march, you know what, let's go for it. So we made everything live. We put it out there, and that was on a Tuesday night. And by Sunday, we had 700 people at the church in Larchmont for our first meeting. So it just spread, like wildfire through social media and word of mouth.
So how active is Indivisible Westchester now in the 37th district race, the upcoming race? When you got candidates all over the place, Shelley Mayer,
right,
Samad Khojesta, Dan Shore,
right,
who we would like to have on the program, but they have not responded. So how involved are you in that race, and what are your issues?
We are very involved. We have endorsed Shelley Mayer. We do have a group we already have a working group that's already organizing around the race. Shelley is opening up her office in Mamaroneck on Wednesday evening. So, we were the ground troops in many cases for Georgia's campaign. So what we found was that people loved that. They loved campaigning. Members loved being part of the political process. And a lot of people, they loved phone banking and canvassing and writing postcards and talking to people
Most
about
of these people,
the
this
election.
was their first foray?
It was their first foray, yes. And that's what's so interesting is that many people, it's their first foray, and they really found that they loved it. And I think that's just that's the heart of what democracy is, elections. We are so blessed that we live in a country where we have open and free elections.
I got a question for you about the makeup of Indivisible Westchester.
Sure.
Are most of it from what I call the precious communities, Larchmont, Rye, parts of Harrison?
Right, the Sound Shore. It's very Sound Shore heavy, but we are represented.
Very wealthy.
Yeah, it's.
So are you culling? So you're not culling much from Mount Vernon, and there's another Sound Shore community that we're not mentioning, and that's Portchester.
Portchester, we do.
This is a working class town,
right? No, we have a lot of outreach to Portchester. We have a Mount Vernon. We have a Mount Vernon group. What's interesting is that we have a group just about. So when we organized, we had all these 700 people. So with 700 people, the question was, well, what do we do with 700 people? Well, we divide them up by where they live, and then we train them. So at this meeting, we divided people up and we trained them. We broke them down into groups based on where they lived, and over time, other groups have popped up. So we have a town, from Yorktown to Mount Vernon to there's a huge group in Yonkers that's actually part of CD16. So they're aligned with the Bronx. There's Northern Indivisible up in Bedford. It's literally, there's a whole River Towns group. So it covers, we literally cover the entire county. Now, is it more, it is more concentrated in the Sound Shore because that's where we originated just by, the fact of where we started this whole thing. But we do have and have been able to expand all throughout the county, which is so fantastic because it's great when we have events. After the Women's March, we had all the people, we had an event at a restaurant downtown, in the city, and more than 200 people showed up to gather after the march, and people from all over. It was fantastic. It's so wonderful to be part of a movement that really you have people, and I have friends and now cohorts who live all over. It really, it's fabulous.
Do you think that momentum would be lost in the future after things have settled down and Indivisible Westchester has and the candidates that you support are in office, and would that movement change into something else, or would it still stay as an advocacy movement?
That's an interesting question. I always like to think that we will stay as an advocacy movement. One of the things that we feel strongly about is that we're not just about getting people elected. We're also about making sure that they are held accountable. So it's kind of like, hey, when you're elected, the accountability starts now. The buck doesn't stop there. We're going to hold you to uphold these values that, you purport to hold. And we want to see those reflected through your policies in office. So it really just continues. Case in point, Georgia's elected. We were able to flip 3 seats, but there's still a group that goes to Board of Legislators meetings, and they're going to work on seeing the Immigrant Protection Act and some of these other things passed. So it's going to continue.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to take a break, and then we will continue. We're talking today with Shannon Powell with Indivisible Westchester. I wish it was an easier name to pronounce.
Call it Indy Westchester.
But it's not. And we're going to come back with our discussion about their movement which is at least 700 strong. It probably is larger now than when had the first meeting. This is WVOX and WVOX. We are Westchester Eye on the radio, and we will be right back after this commercial break.
WVOX. Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm John Sharan, along with Ardina Seward and Peter Moses. And today a special in-studio guest, Shannon Powell, one of the co-founders of Indivisible Westchester, a grassroots movement designed to bring some civility back to the political process.
Yes.
And Shannon, I know you mentioned that you were involved with the Women's March on Saturday, and that you also have an event coming up on Sunday.
We do.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was great to be back at the Women's March. I went to the Women's March in D.C., and that was, such a momentous point in my life. I mean, it was really one of the most unbelievable events I've ever been involved in. And having lived in Washington for nearly 10 years and seeing all those people on the mall, and just the energy that was there, it was great. So it was wonderful then to be able to be in the city and to, experience something similar. I mean, it was great to see that there was still just a huge turnout of, hundreds of thousands of people who were very energized. It's also nice to see that a lot of the focus, in regards to the Women's March, is about voting, getting people to vote, getting women to run. And again, just getting people engaged in the political process, because at the end of the day, this is what we're all about. I mean, we just want people to be involved in their democracy. And I think part of what you see, some of the disconnect and the bitterness, nastiness, is because people have been unengaged or disengaged from their communities. And, it's really harder to be divisive when when you're close, when you have a close, tight-knit community. I think it is kind of, it's harder to speak a certain way and look at people a certain way when you feel like you're all interconnected and working together, for a greater good. So it was wonderful. I mean, we had hundreds of people. We had this great event, afterwards, where we all got to get together at a restaurant and really bond. And it was just so interesting to be there with all these people from all over the county who I didn't know a year ago.
Well, what happens? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no.
What happens when people start getting discouraged because you have a party in power on a national level,
right?
Who seem tone deaf to most criticism? They only play to a base,
right?
And that base is has a certain amount of people. It's not growing. It's not shrinking. It's staying pretty much the same. And they don't care about the Women's March. And they don't care about coffee clutches. Or they don't care about anyone who opposes them. At some point, is there some level of discouragement, or is this also a social thing?
Well, the antidote to being discouraged is just to be hyperactive on the local level, which is from our first meeting with all those people is what we preached. We just said, the wall of resistance starts in your own backyard. And that's where you need to start. That's where you need to stay focused. And that's actually where you can have the most strength in your resistance, is by building community and by passing legislation and seeing, the kind of government you want reflected here at home. And so, it's really more, it's really more about just trying to build that community and build from, again, the grassroots up by starting in Westchester, in your town, in your village, then moving up to the legislature, then moving on to the state elections that we're going to have this year, and then going, then worrying about congressional. But it really is just let's have the building blocks here at home. And I think that's one of the things that keep people from being discouraged, because the government that is in your own backyard is the one that's closest to you, and it's also the one that you can have the most change. I mean, you can affect the most change by working with the government that you're closest to. It's always been that case. And then you're building a bench.
All issues are local.
All politics is local. I mean, it gets back to that very, 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 very basic, an old saying.
I don't mean to be a pundit, but I guess I am.
No, that's fine.
All the communities that you mentioned,
Uh-huh.
all of them,
Right.
are Democratic strongholds.
They are. Well, Yorktown, they flipped in
Okay,
that.
all right, not Yorktown, but the Sound Shore communities, other than Portchester, where you don't have a group yet.
And Eastchester.
And Eastchester.
Yes, which we do have a group.
The two predominantly Italian-American communities, along with Harrison. Mm-hmm. Do you have a Harrison group?
There is not a Harrison group. No.
All right, so...
Right.
But for the most
But
part,
there's
the
probably
group...
some
the
Harrison. There's some Harrison members, I believe, in one of our sister groups, We Persist.
Okay, but at the same time, one could argue that you're preaching to the choir.
Yes, but one could also argue that, the status quo wasn't getting it done because we didn't have a county executive who was Republican, and we didn't have a supermajority of the county legislature that was Democratic. So all of that flipped.
In the Newcastle race, who did you guys support?
We had the slate that had Kristen Browdy and Ivy Poole.
And Ivy won.
Yes, Kristen lost. She
ran
a good race.
Ardina and I have known Browdy for 30 some odd years.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
that's right.
way back in the day.
Yeah.
She's fantastic.
We've had her on the program.
We've had her on the program. And we had him on the program before he became her.
Kristen decided to run. She was at our meeting, and she was recruited to run at our meeting. So, which is fantastic because, again, this is getting people involved in the political process, not just as an activist or voting. I mean, to me, the very basic thing that people can do is vote. And look, if you haven't voted or you're not an active voter and you usually don't vote in off your elections or whatever, and you're doing that.
But she lost by 300 votes.
Yeah, she lost. But she ran a good campaign. And, now she's really out there being an activist on so many different fronts. And it's wonderful to see serving on boards, advocating for transgender rights, so many things that are important that, she's stepped up.
And the Congress is trying to subvert that, and so is the president.
Yes, and so now, that kind of activism is really important. And again, where can you affect the most change? Well, in your own backyard. It gets back to your own backyard by making sure that the state has protections or your own town has protections, where some of these things, because again, when the federal government is doing stuff, they're taking away rights, they're dismantling the EPA, things like that, then this is where the places like the state and local governments have to step in. And oftentimes that's where progressive movements start anyway. They usually start more at the local level and move their way up versus, the other way around.
Which raises the issue about becoming a progressive. How do you light a spark under a PTA soccer mom who transitions, who all of a sudden is out there carrying a sign and protesting? I mean, that's a long journey. How is that? What is the indoctrination process?
I think it's literally offering a vehicle for people to plug in. I think now what you see is that people are genuinely frustrated. I mean, they're more than frustrated. A lot of people are angry, they're sad, they're terrified. I mean, it's all different kinds of emotions, right? But in the past, it was kind of like, where do I go? And, in the past, a lot of these options, were kind of maybe a little too staid, but since I think that what lights the spark is that this whole Indivisible, there are like 6,000 chapters across the nation. It really is a movement. So I think that part of the spark is that people feel like they're plugging into a movement. And again, since we're so locally organized, you just see right away how you can make a difference. And I think that's the key, is that there's a place to go and there's something to do, because if not, then you're just kind of spinning your wheels. And it's open. It's like, look, if you want to be involved, great, we'll find something for you to do. You can work with us at the umbrella level, or you can go join the group in your own town. And all the groups kind of are organized. They do what they want. I mean, they're their own bosses. They tap into what people are interested in and what they're passionate about. And I think that's also the key for getting people involved, is that they're able to kind of channel what matters to them in a positive way.
And that brings us back to the 37th district race.
Uh-huh.
Why is that such a big deal? And how important is that? And what happens if somebody says, I don't want to vote? What is the significance of not voting and not getting involved?
Well, I mean, the significance of not voting, New York has one of the lowest voter participation rates of all the states, and part of that is because of our election laws are antiquated. And I'm happy to see that Governor Cuomo has now introduced in his budget money to try and rectify that by allowing early voting. He also wants to have same-day registration. That would take, I believe, a constitutional change. But at least there is, as of right now, money in the budget to help make that's going to make voting easier. And so that should increase voter turnout.
Well, but why should they pay attention to these?
We got to go to break.
We're going to break, so we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Stay with us, folks. We will be back.
WVOX. Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
We are back live, Westchester Eye on the radio, into our final quarter hour. I am with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and our guest today is Shannon Powell, who is a founder of Indivisible Westchester, a progressive political group that's shaped a lot of races. One coming up, 37th District,
right?
Westchester County, and we were talking earlier about the significance of that seat, the issues, and why it is important for people to come out and vote. Shannon, can you tell us a little bit more about the issues governing that race?
Sure. Well, the 37th district is really important because who wins that race helps determine who's in charge of the state Senate. So in order to help Democrats have as much of an advantage as they can, a Democrat has to win that seat. So now there's a whole side case of a group called the Independent Democratic Conference, which is a group of kind of rogue Democrats who caucus with the Republicans. In the past, there is an agreement that they are actually going to come back and work with the Democrats this time around. But basically, it all gets back to so many of these issues really hinge on making sure that the seat stays blue, stays in Democratic hands. So we need to have the governor call a special election, which he has not done yet. So people in the district are very unhappy, activists at least, because right now they're being disenfranchised. There's not a special election being called, so there's no representation. The budgeting process is going on, so they aren't being represented. That seat's empty as this budget process goes on. But speaking of the budget, some of the important issues, the tax bill and what this federal tax bill is going to mean for New Yorkers. And Governor Cuomo has certain proposals to change taxation, to move to a payroll tax, some other things. So to make sure that, we have representation and that we have somebody in there who's going to support, progressive policies and back whatever Cuomo has, in terms of making sure that it's progressive. So, funding for education, according to the budget, Cuomo is giving more money to Westchester than he has, but foundation aid is not being funded at the rate that it should be. So, it's still trying to make sure that we're getting the funding here in Westchester that we could, and actually throughout the state. I mean, it needs to be better. Environmental protections, this on the state level is very important, especially as you see the federal regulations being weakened. Then the onus is going to be more and more on the states to make up ground there. Of course, all of these things have monetary implications. And the state has something like a $3 million or $3 billion $3 billion deficit. I think it's $4 billion, but if you offset the revenue sources, the governor says so. You need a strong person in there because the state has a lot of challenges. Election reform again. So making sure that you have a candidate in who's going to fight for the kind of election reforms that, again, I was talking about earlier, that the governor has in place to allow for early voting and to try and push for same-day registration. These are all very, very, very important things.
I was going to say the issues you're talking about could appeal to quite a few of our listeners. You have an event coming up on Sunday. Why don't you tell them where it is, what it is, and how they can get involved?
Oh, sure. Our event on Sunday is at Ethical Culture. So it is at 3:30, and it's our 1-year anniversary.
Ethical Culture in the Bronx.
Yeah, no, Ethical
Riverdale.
Culture in White Plains.
In White Plains.
Saxon Woods, right?
Yes, thank
Saxon
you.
Woods,
I was
yeah.
going to say Saxon. Yes.
Saxon Woods.
And then so that's at 3:30. Nita Lowy is going to be our keynote. We're going to have Shelley Mayer speak. We also are going to have a representative from Higher Heights, which is a new organization that's dedicated to having women of color, Black women, run for office. So that's really great. And then we're also going to have some leaders from some of the smaller groups from across the county talk about their success stories. So they're going to share with the larger audience that's going to assemble the races that they picked, how they organized, and what they found, to be successful, to just try and motivate people. And so we're going to just talk about the initiatives that we have coming up for the next year, which, as we were just talking about, working on the George Latimer's old seat, SD 37. We would like to try and defeat Terrence Murphy up in SD 40. He's a right-wing Republican who's a Trump supporter. We would like to fight the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus. We would like to see them come back into the fold fully with the Democratic Party. And then we're also going to adopt FASO seat, which is SD 19, as a congressional seat to try and flip. So in Westchester, you have congressional district 16, 17, and 18. So this is literally our sister district. And so we're already have some phone banking opportunities that we have that we're setting up, postcard writing campaigns. We're going to do some canvassing up there. So we're really going to adopt this as a district that we would like to see flip, and hopefully we can help then be a part of this blue wave that everybody is anticipating is going to happen. And we're going to see if we can help potentially change Congress and take back Congress in for the midterm. So we have a lot going on. So that's what we're going to talk about, all of these efforts.
And at this event, it's free.
It's free.
And people don't have to actually go in there and feel that they've committed to something. They can go to just observe, and if they want to sign up, they can, right?
Right, yeah. Exactly, and we're going to have a table where people can sign up if they want to join if they want to get our newsletter, if they would like to find a local group they would like to hook into. We also have different organizations that are tabling, like Planned Parenthood, Moms Demand Action, which has been very out front, when it comes to the gun issue, gun violence in America, and some other organizations. So it's a little bit of a fair to, see what other kind of progressive organizations there are, but then, to come listen, and everybody's welcome. And then we're having pizza at Lombard. I think it's Lombardi's up the street. So that's Lombardo's. Thank you. So that's the real important part at 5:00. We're going to have some pizza and some more just
Lombardo's in White Plains?
Yeah, on Mamaroneck Avenue. Yeah. So, have the bonding experience.
It was Milkmaid. Yeah. That was Milkmaid at one
Yes,
point.
It was. Yes, it was.
Back in the
What
day,
about
yes.
contact information? Your website.
Sure.
You want to get that out there?
Yes. We have a website, which is Indivisible Westchester. So it is indivisiblewestchester.org, and then our Twitter. We have a Twitter handle, which is at Indivis, which is what you guys were saying. Remember the Indivis Westcher, which is Westchester without any vowels. And we have a public Facebook page, which is Indivisible Westchester. So you can join and like and follow us on that public Facebook page. So that's where we do. So we have information about Sunday's event there, and just the other issues that we're tackling and races that we're watching and issues that we find important. So that's how you can find us. And we are in the midst of upgrading our website, updating it to reflect everything that's going on in 2018 and what all of our initiatives are. So we're in the process of doing that too.
Ardina.
Yes.
We have a show next week.
Woo-hoo.
Next week we have a show, and I'm waiting for a call back, but I think we're on. We have Max Knobbe, Knobbe. Max is an executive with BronxNet, and Max, believe it or not, is going to jump in the water around Valentine's Day with a bunch of people, the Bronx Polar Bear Club, which he has done before. Stalwart Max is going to lead the entourage, and he's going to be on the air, and he's going to tell us how he does it, why he does it, and why you should do it, although I think it's crazy.
He's not convincing me to do it.
Well, Brave Max.
He's braver than I am, I'll say that.
I like to call him Mad Max, but he's going to be...
Yes, I think Mad Max, and they're going to go in the sound where?
They're going to go on the sound, I believe it's at Orchard Beach. And as I said, it's been done before. He's in great shape. I mean, he's fit, tight, tough, the whole 9 yards, and he's going to extol the virtues of going in there and freezing your parts off.
Well, somebody should tell all of them they need to put something on their skin to go in the water at Orchard Beach. It's a shame, but it is by far the dirtiest water in the metropolitan area. That all the effluent from the well, not just from the sewage. There's effluent from several locations. Rodman's Neck is where you've been there many times. The police range. There's lead that has leached into the soil there. That God knows what it's done. And then there's that Eastchester fill that is just south of Co-op City, which I think they euphemistically call Mount Bronx.
Yes.
And that is so toxic. And this isn't a joke.
With all the vents for the methane.
That is so toxic that the area just south of that, known as Country Club.
The park.
Yeah, Pelham Bay Park and Country Club have two of the most intense cancer clusters of anywhere in the country. Lenny Levitt was with Newsday and I was with the Post and then with Channel 9. We both did many, many stories about how many people were born with birth defects. How many? There was a time in the park. There was a police. There were police horses that were bivouacked there, and 7 or 8 men got their wives pregnant in the same year. Every one of them miscarried.
Oh.
Every single one of them. So Orchard Beach, that water around Orchard Beach and all of Eastchester Bay needs a lot of work. And also Co-op City is right there, and I'm sure there are things going into the sound there that don't belong there. But anyway, that's my conversation, and I'll talk to him about this on the air.
We got to do a show on environmental issues, and that's what Indivisible Westchester deals with. Also, it's all part of that big.
I think the biggest question in the next 13 days is, how do New Yorkers root in the Super Bowl? We mostly universally hate the Patriots, and I got to tell you, I don't feel any better about the Eagles because Philadelphia fans are the worst in the country.
And Shannon Powell, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a great week.